Hello everyone, welcome to Or This. It is my video where I do some Monday morning quarterbacking on the sermon, as well as the theme and scriptures for the previous Sunday. And this video is for the Sunday of the Transfiguration of our Lord, which was February 14th. And the scriptures for this week that we had in our worship were from Psalm 50, verses 1 through 6, from 2 Kings 2, verses 1 through 12, and from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. And the sermon focused on the Mark passage, which was the story of the Transfiguration, meaning the story where Jesus is on a mountaintop with three of his disciples, and all of a sudden he was transfigured. Clouds became dazzling white. There was bright light, and then Moses and Elijah are gathered with Jesus talking, and the disciples are kind of frightened by the whole thing, but also a little bit mesmerized by it. And during that time, they hear a voice from heaven that says, "This is my son, the beloved, listen to him." Now, briefly, I'm going to say that in my sermon, I talked about a little bit about how much trouble I have sometimes with preaching on this passage, and that it's not my favorite. And the struggle of figuring out how you take an episode like this that has never happened again, that same thing has never happened ever again. How do you take that and say, well, and apply that to what is going on in the world today? But what I did instead was look at it as an episode of supernatural grace. And maybe I can say this more succinctly and more easily in my little summary here than I did in the entire sermon. But basically saying that this is supernatural grace. There's a lot of supernatural things going on here as far as the light and Jesus gathering with this prophet and Moses, who have been long gone. So there's that aspect. But also the opportunity for these three men, being Peter, James, and John, Jesus' disciples, to be in the presence of God. Well, I mean, obviously God is in this surreal moment, but Jesus invited Peter, James, and John to be part of that moment. And although it was overwhelming for them, it also must have had an impact upon their faith in a very powerful way. And because in that moment they saw who Jesus was, which is God, the presence of God, and it was grace that they were invited to be part of this, because they weren't the best or the most faithful disciples of Jesus, but Jesus had them be part of that. And in that opportunity to be part of this amazing mountaintop experience, that was grace. And supernatural grace is basically grace that we don't experience in our human everyday life. So certainly this kind of thing doesn't happen in everyday life. But it doesn't have to be a mountaintop experience with dazzling light to be supernatural grace. Supernatural grace can be anything that we experience, that a human being experiences in their lives, that is so gracious and merciful that it goes beyond what we would expect as a human being, how to be treated or what to experience. In things like forgiveness when we thought we'd never be forgiven for what we did, or just some ways that people reach out and support us, or there's lots of different things we see in throughout history of Christians, people of faith, being merciful towards groups of people that really needed mercy but were being treated horribly. And so the idea of supernatural grace, it's not limited to the mountaintop. It's not limited to this story in the scriptures, but it is something that continues to happen among us now. And something that, so I can't claim this because kudos and shout out to Mr. Drotliff, who, Tom Drotliff, who pointed out the listen to him part of the voice of God, which I really didn't talk about at all in my sermon. But that during that mountaintop experience, God says, "This is my son, the beloved." When he says, "Listen to him," he's talking to Jesus' disciples. So if Jesus is the person who lives out supernatural grace in many different ways, other than just inviting the disciples on the mountaintop, but he does this in so many different ways, through his teaching and caring for the sick and spending time with the sinner and inviting women to be part of his, part of his disciples and part of the movement that is going to continue his mission. In so many ways, Jesus lives out supernatural grace. God is saying, listen to him, listen to Jesus. And in listening to him, then they're going to be called to also share this supernatural grace. And so then we, as Jesus followers who have experienced supernatural grace just because of God's love for us and God's forgiveness for us, we then are called to live out this kind of grace towards other people. And again, we have so many examples of it in history that can help us just doing things for people who haven't earned the nice gesture. We just do it because we want to help people have a better day, a better life. We do it because of God's love shared with us, of God's supernatural grace transforming our lives. And so we look to share that so that other people's lives can be transformed as well. And I'm sure maybe you can think, I encourage you to think of times when you have experienced a gracious act towards you that you never would have expected, you don't feel like you deserved. And, it's maybe even something you've never experienced before in your life. And that's supernatural grace. It's a gracious act that we wouldn't expect because humans don't generally act that way towards each other. But because God is part of our lives and God is at work through us, supernatural grace all of a sudden takes shape in our world. So that's my reflection for you for this week. And I encourage you to share any thoughts that you have in the comments about the sermon or about what I just shared. Any examples of supernatural grace you've experienced lately or that come to your mind. This example I gave was the kindness that so many people showed in sending cards and gifts and making meals for me when my daughter was born last year. It was just overwhelming. So, and very kind and very gracious. So share your thoughts in the comments here on Facebook or on YouTube. And God bless you and thank you for watching.